Mercedes versus Red Bull. 2021, this one rewrote the rulebook on championship drama and left half the world arguing about what they just witnessed. Mercedes came into Abu Dhabi with Lewis Hamilton chasing his 8th world title, which would have broken the all-time record. 7 races into the season, Hamilton had been 32 points clear. The team had dominated for 7 straight years. This was supposed to be coronation number 8. Instead, it turned into the most controversial finish in modern F1 history. Max Verstappen and Red Bull had been clawing back all season long. By the time they reached Yas Marina, they were dead level on points. Hamilton controlled the race from the front. He built a gap, managed the tires, did everything right. Then, with 5 laps to go, Nicholas Latifi crashed. Safety car. The race director made a call that split the sport down the middle. Lapped cars between Hamilton and Verstappen were allowed to unlap themselves, but only those specific cars. Verstappen pitted for fresh, soft tires. Hamilton stayed out on old hards. 1 lap of racing remained. Verstappen passed Hamilton into turn 5 and took the championship. Mercedes protested immediately. The FIA dismissed it. Red Bull celebrated. Hamilton's camp felt robbed. For neutral fans tired of Mercedes' dominance, this was the ending they didn't know they wanted. 8 years of Silver Arrow's supremacy ended in the most abrupt way possible. The satisfaction wasn't in the controversy. It was in the changing of the guard. A new champion, a new era, and the end of what felt like an unbreakable streak. Verstappen didn't just win the title. He took it from the most successful team in the sport's recent history on the final lap of the final race. That's the kind of plot twist that sticks forever. Ferrari versus Mercedes. 2017 and 2018, these 2 seasons belong together because they told the same story twice. Ferrari started both years looking like genuine title contenders. Sebastian Vettel led the championship at the halfway point in 2017. He led again in 2018. Both times, the wheels came off. In 2017, Ferrari won the first 2 races in Australia and China. Vettel built an early lead while Mercedes scrambled to find pace. By the summer break, it looked competitive. Then, Singapore happened. Vettel, Kimi Räikkönen, and Verstappen collided at the start. Vettel's race was over in seconds. That swung the momentum hard. Mercedes capitalized. Hamilton won 5 of the next 6 races. Vettel's errors started piling up. He collided with Hamilton in Baku, crashed out of the lead in Germany, and made contact with Verstappen in Italy. By the time they reached Mexico, the title was gone. Mercedes wrapped it up with 2 races to spare. The 2018 season followed an almost identical script. Vettel won the first 2 races again. He extended his lead through the first half of the season. Then came Hockenheim, his home race. Vettel was leading in the rain when he lost the rear end and slid into the barriers. That mistake shifted everything. Hamilton won that race and never looked back. Vettel made more errors in Monza, crashed in practice in Austin, and the pressure just kept building. Ferrari's strategy calls got worse. The team looked rattled. Hamilton sealed his 5th title in Mexico with 2 rounds remaining. What made these losses satisfying to so many wasn't just Ferrari's collapse, it was the manner of it. They had the car, they had the driver, they had the resources, and they fell apart under pressure both times. For fans tired of Ferrari's arrogance or their constant claims of being back, these 2 seasons were brutal reality checks. Mercedes didn't just beat them, they outlasted them. They stayed composed while Ferrari crumbled, and watching a team with that much history and budget fail to close the deal twice in a row, that's the kind of sporting pain that resonates. Red Bull versus Ferrari. 2022, this was supposed to be Ferrari's comeback year. The new regulations reset the grid. Ferrari came out swinging with the F175, a car that looked dominant in pre-season testing. Charles Leclerc won 2 of the first 3 races. He led the championship by 46 points after Australia. The narrative was set. Ferrari was back. Red Bull had reliability issues. Verstappen retired twice in the first 3 rounds. It looked like the championship was Leclerc's to lose. Then, Ferrari found every possible way to lose it. Spain started the collapse. Leclerc was leading comfortably when his power unit failed. He was handed a DNF while running first. That was 25 points gone. Monaco was next. Ferrari put Leclerc on the wrong strategy in his home race. He dropped from pole position to 4th. Then came Baku. Leclerc was leading again when another power unit failure knocked him out. 2 races, 2 mechanical DNFs while leading. The points gap evaporated. But the real pain came from the strategy errors. Leclerc lost wins in Monaco, Silverstone, and Hungary due to questionable pit calls and poor tire management. Ferrari's pit wall looked lost. At Silverstone, they left Leclerc out too long on old tires, while Carlos Sainz took his first career win. In Hungary, they called Leclerc in for hard tires when the track was drying, killing his race. Meanwhile, Verstappen and Red Bull kept their heads down and accumulated points. Once they fixed the reliability issues, they were unstoppable. Verstappen won 15 races that season. Ferrari's advantage turned into a nightmare. By the summer break, the championship was effectively over. Red Bull clinched the constructors' title in Austin with 4 races remaining. Verstappen wrapped up the driver's title in Japan with 4 rounds to go. Ferrari finished 205 points behind in the standings, despite starting the year with the fastest car. For fans who'd watched Ferrari dominate the early 2000s, this was poetic. They had everything they needed and still bottled it. The satisfaction came from watching a team with Ferrari's budget, history, and expectations completely fall apart under the weight of their own mistakes. Red Bull didn't just win, they capitalized on every Ferrari error and turned what should have been a fight into a procession. McLaren versus Red Bull, 2024, this one's still fresh and it stings for a very specific reason. McLaren entered the season with a car that looked midfield at best. By Miami, they'd found something. The upgrades transformed the MCL38 into the fastest car on the grid. Lando Norris started winning. He took his first career victory in Miami, then added more in the Netherlands and Singapore. Oscar Piastri won in Hungary and Baku. McLaren had the pace. They had 2 strong drivers. They had momentum, and they still let the championship slip through their fingers. Norris was Verstappen's closest challenger, but the gap never closed enough. The errors were constant. In Canada, McLaren's strategy left Norris vulnerable, and he lost positions. At Silverstone, a slow pit stop cost him track position. In Hungary, team orders drama saw Piastri take the win while Norris fumed. Then came Monza. Norris qualified on pole, but got a poor start and lost the lead immediately. McLaren's race pace was there, but the execution wasn't. By the time they reached Singapore, Norris needed perfection. He delivered in Singapore with a dominant win, but it wasn't enough. Verstappen's consistency and Red Bull's early season dominance had built too big a buffer. Even when the RB20 wasn't the fastest car anymore, Verstappen kept finishing on the podium. McLaren needed clean weekends and didn't get them. The team admitted they left over 50 points on the table through strategy mistakes and operational errors. Norris himself acknowledged he made mistakes early in the season when the pressure ramped up. By Brazil, the championship was decided. Verstappen clinched in Las Vegas with 2 races remaining. McLaren won the Constructors' Championship in Abu Dhabi, but the driver's title was gone. What made this loss satisfying for some wasn't about hating McLaren. It was about seeing a team fail to execute when everything was in their favor. They had the fastest car for half the season and couldn't convert it into a title. For Verstappen fans and neutral observers, watching Red Bull hold off a faster car through pure consistency and racecraft was the storyline that wrote itself. McLaren didn't lose to a better car, they lost to a better operation. Mercedes versus Brawn GP. 2009, this loss felt different because it was an upset nobody saw coming. Mercedes had been a works engine supplier and were coming off the back of winning with McLaren in 2008. They had resources, history, and expectations. Then Ross Brawn bought the Honda team for £1, kept 8 staff members, and built a car with a double diffuser that exploited a loophole in the regulations. Brawn GP had no wind tunnel time, a shoestring budget, and drivers nobody expected to challenge for titles. Jenson Button hadn't won a race in his entire career. Rubens Barrichello was considered past his prime. The car was painted in basic white and fluorescent yellow because they didn't even have a sponsor at the start of the season. And yet, they dominated the first half of 2009. Button won 6 of the first 7 races. He built a massive points lead while teams like Mercedes, Ferrari, and McLaren scrambled to develop their own double diffusers and clawback performance. By the time the big teams caught up, it was too late. Brawn had banked enough points to hold on. Button won the Drivers' Championship in Brazil with 1 race remaining. Brawn took the Constructors' title despite being outspent by a factor of 10. For fans of the underdog story, this was perfection. A team that shouldn't have existed beat the establishment with ingenuity and timing. For Mercedes and the other factory teams, it was a humiliating reminder that money doesn't always win. The satisfaction came from watching a privateer team, with no business being competitive, dismantle the sports powerhouses through clever engineering and bold decisions. Brawn GP existed for 1 season, 1 won both titles and then got bought by Mercedes. The irony? Mercedes spent the next decade dominating F1, but in 2009, they got beaten by a team with a budget smaller than their catering bill. That's 10 losses that hit different. Championships decided on the final lap. Dominant teams falling apart under pressure. Underdogs rewriting the script. These weren't just defeats. They were moments that reset the sport. If you want more deep dives into F1 history, strategy breakdowns, and the chaos that makes this sport unforgettable, hit subscribe. There's plenty more where this came from. Ferrari versus Brawn GP. 2009. This wasn't just any Ferrari loss. This was the Scuderia getting outplayed by a team that literally didn't exist 6 months earlier. Ferrari came into 2009 as one of the favorites. They'd finished second in the Constructors' Championship the year before, had Kimi Räikkönen and Felipe Massa in the seats, and rolled into testing with confidence. Then the regulations changed. New aero rules, less downforce, and a ban on traction control. Ferrari completely misread the rulebook. Their F60 was a disaster from day one. The car was slow, unpredictable, and fundamentally flawed. Meanwhile, Brawn GP with their double diffuser were winning races. Ferrari didn't score a podium until round 4 in Bahrain, and that was only because Massa lucked into third. Räikkönen looked lost all season. The team's technical director admitted they designed the car around the wrong concept and couldn't fix it mid-season. Ferrari finished fourth in the Constructors' Championship behind Brawn, Red Bull, and McLaren. They scored just 70 points all year. Brawn, running on fumes financially, scored 172. The satisfaction here was watching Ferrari's arrogance meet reality. They dominated the early 2000s and assumed they'd figure it out. Instead, a team built from Honda's scraps with an eighth of Ferrari's budget destroyed them. Kimi Räikkönen, the reigning 2007 world champion, finished 12th in the standings. Massa managed fourth, but he missed half the season after his Hungary accident. By any metric, it was a catastrophic year for Ferrari. What made it sting even more was that Brawn hired some of Ferrari's own methodology. Ross Brawn had been Ferrari's technical director during their dominant Schumacher era. He left, built a team from nothing, and embarrassed them. For fans tired of Ferrari's excuses and their insistence that they were still the sports benchmark, 2009 was a reality check delivered with surgical precision. The pride came before the fall, and the fall was steep. Red Bull versus Mercedes. 2014 to 2016, these 3 seasons belong together because they showed what happens when one team nails a regulation change and everyone else spends years trying to catch up. Red Bull had won 4 straight championships from 2010 to 2013. They had Sebastian Vettel, Adrian Newey's design genius, and an engine partnership with Renault. They looked unstoppable. Then the hybrid era started in 2014, and Mercedes buried them. The new power unit regulations prioritized energy recovery and fuel efficiency. Mercedes built the best engine by a huge margin. Red Bull's Renault power unit was unreliable, underpowered, and constantly overheating. Vettel won just 1 race in 2014. Red Bull didn't win the Constructors' title. Mercedes won 16 out of 19 races that season. The gap was humiliating. Red Bull kept complaining publicly about Renault's engine. The relationship turned toxic. Vettel left for Ferrari at the end of the year, frustrated by the lack of competitiveness. Daniel Ricciardo stayed and managed 3 wins across 2014, but it wasn't nearly enough. In 2015, Mercedes won 16 races again. Red Bull took 3. The pattern continued. By 2016, Red Bull was still stuck in the same position. Mercedes won 19 races. Red Bull managed 2. Verstappen joined mid-season and won in Spain on his debut for the team. But even that highlight couldn't cover the fact that Red Bull had gone from 4-time champions to also-rans in 3 years. What made this stretch of losses satisfying for Mercedes fans and neutrals was the role reversal. Red Bull had spent the early 2010s dominating so thoroughly that the FIA changed regulations trying to slow them down. Then, Mercedes did the exact same thing to them, only worse. Red Bull's dominance lasted 4 years. Mercedes's lasted 8. And for 3 of those years, Red Bull couldn't do anything but watch and complain. The satisfaction came from seeing a team that had steamrolled the competition get steamrolled themselves. Red Bull had no answers. Their engine supplier let them down. Their design couldn't compensate. And Mercedes just kept winning. It wasn't close. And that's what made it hurt. Red Bull went from setting records to being an afterthought in the title fight. For fans who'd grown tired of Vettel's dominance, watching him struggle in an uncompetitive car felt like balance being restored. McLaren versus Ferrari, 2007 2007 and 2008, these two seasons were chaos wrapped in championship battles, and McLaren's role in both was a masterclass in self-destruction. In 2007, McLaren had the fastest car. They had Fernando Alonso, a two-time world champion. They had Lewis Hamilton, a rookie who was immediately on Alonso's pace. The team should have dominated. Instead, they imploded. Alonso and Hamilton couldn't stand each other. The tension boiled over in Hungary when Alonso blocked Hamilton in the pits during qualifying in retaliation for team orders favoring Hamilton. McLaren was fined and investigated. Then came Spygate. McLaren was found guilty of possessing Ferrari's technical documents. The FIA stripped them of all their constructors' points and fined them $100 million. It was the biggest penalty in F1 history. McLaren kept their drivers' points, but the damage was done. Hamilton and Alonso went into the final race tied on points with Ferrari's Kimi Räikkönen 1 point behind. Hamilton needed to finish 5th or higher to win the title. He qualified 2nd, but had a gearbox issue in the race and dropped to 7th. Räikkönen won the race and the championship by 1 point. McLaren lost both titles in the most painful way possible. The 2008 season should have been redemption. Alonso left after the toxic 2007 relationship broke down completely. Hamilton had the team to himself. McLaren had the pace again, but Ferrari's Felipe Massa was just as fast. The championship went down to the final corner of the final lap in Brazil. Hamilton needed 5th place to beat Massa. He was running 6th with 2 laps to go. He passed Timo Glock in the final corner as Glock struggled on dry tires in wet conditions. Hamilton finished 5th. He won the championship by 1 point. McLaren celebrated, but it was a title built on the thinnest of margins after a year of mistakes. What made McLaren's 2007 loss satisfying was the sheer scale of the collapse. They had 2 of the fastest drivers, the best car, and threw it all away through internal politics and a cheating scandal. Ferrari won because McLaren destroyed themselves. For Ferrari fans and anyone tired of McLaren's arrogance during their dominant early 2000s partnership with Mercedes, watching them lose $100 million and both championships felt like justice. And even when Hamilton won in 2008, it was by a single point after a season where McLaren's operational mistakes nearly cost them again. The satisfaction wasn't just in Ferrari winning in 2007, it was in watching McLaren learn the hard way that talent and speed mean nothing if the team can't hold itself together.